Again, hopefully you've all had a chance to read the prompts here and chat in a little bit about yourself. Thank you for being here today. And I'm here to just sort of welcome you to this webinar, our fourth Law and Policy webinar from Nourish Colorado. Just a little bit about who you'll be hearing from today. My name is Wendy. I work at Nourish Colorado, and I have been really fortunate enough to be able to be a part of this entire roadmap process that I will talk a little bit more about in a minute. And I just was hoping that Rosalind and then Becca and then Sarah, if you could all just unmute in that order and just say hi and introduce yourself, since everyone will be hearing from you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rosalind May. I'm the Executive Director of the Colorado Farmers Market Association, and Wendy's invited me to present some of the background regarding EBT equipment, particularly for farmers markets as well as direct marketing farmers. Thank you.
Becca.
Hi, my name is Becca. I work with Nourish Colorado as a legal analyst, and I'll be presenting today. I helped create the roadmap and will be demonstrating to you all what we learned with technology access.
Hi everyone, Sarah Mitchell. I am the EBT supervisor with the Colorado Department of Human Services. I work within the Food and Energy Division. I am the main contact for farmers and farmers markets to get connected with EBT equipment. Currently, we'll learn more about like the EBT equipment, but more to come from me in the upcoming slides. So
much more to come. And I'm assuming it's okay, Sarah and Rosalind, too, if you chat in your email addresses at some point, that would be great as well. So people know kind of where you are, how to reach you would be great. So we already did some chat introductions from you all. Thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We are recording this session in both English and Spanish. We will share it out as we will share all of our Law and Policy Roadmap webinars. Please use the chat feature during this sort of main part. We will be here for a full hour and a half until 1:30, and the last 30 minutes will be much more small group discussion oriented. Obviously, we want you unmuted and talking out loud. So one last thing to note as well, we do have translated slides in English and Spanish. As you are about to see, some of the content of these slides is pretty dense. We have some thick content on our slides, so it was a little too much to do parallel translation. So you will see at times we might kind of have an English slide up and then move to the Spanish as we continue to speak. So thank you for your patience with us. So this is how we're going to spend our time together today. We did our welcome. I'm going to own the fact that group agreements are not in here, but so I'll get to that in a minute. I do have a little bit of background I want to share with you about what is Nourish Colorado. Background and purpose. What is the Law and Policy Roadmap that I keep mentioning? What is this about? A little bit about how we are striving to bring an equity lens and more collaboration to our policy work and our policy analysis, as in with this roadmap. And then Becca and Sarah and Rosalind will take it from there to kind of go into the content and like go over the sort of the overview. What is it the issue we were diving into? What are sort of the legal analysis? What is sort of current context about this issue? Then we'll have small group discussions and come back and move into next steps. And I'm going to ask as well. So as I'm talking as well, it's hard for me to monitor the chat. So Jesse or Amber too, if you see any questions or concerns coming up, please just read them and interrupt me as we go. So I wanted to talk a little bit about who we are. And acknowledge, I do see it said group agreements in the agenda, which we'd moved to be about a part of small group discussion. And then I promptly forgot to put that slide into small group discussion. So essentially, the group agreements piece I'm skipping is that we will be having some small group discussions. I know and believe and wholeheartedly trust that everyone on the line here today has subscribed to these principles of speaking up and stepping back and letting other people speak and sharing that space together. And we're very excited to have time to hear from you in the last half an hour of this call. So just a little bit for those of you who may not be familiar with who we are at Nourish Colorado. Our office is in Denver, but we are a statewide organization. We work in every corner of the state. And our mission, they have a little typo here. We don't strengthen, we strengthen. But we are change makers that strengthen connections between farms and communities so that all Coloradans have equitable access to fresh, nutritious foods. And we envision Colorado communities where fresh and local foods enrich the lives of all. And then a little bit more about kind of who we are and how we operate. Some of you may know us, probably particularly on this call, for some of our work around healthy food incentives, like the Double Up Food Bucks program. One thing we just wanted to share with everyone about kind of the how that we work as an organization. There's a lot of words on this slide, and I do not want you to worry about reading the nitty gritty. These are just examples. This is sort of an illustrative table. What we wanted to share with people is that we do have a theory of change. There's a 4-pillar theory of change that's on the left here about how do we think we even get to that vision. And our theory is that we believe we need to strengthen nutritious food environments, increase consumer engagement with their food system, channel like direct resources that we already have, right, to nutritious foods, vibrant farms, and strong communities. And fourthly, to increase economic power for households to purchase nutritious foods. So that's sort of the core of our theory of change that guides our work. And the thing I just wanted to call out in this slide is really around moving from practice to policy to permanency. And here's where I'm going to just sort of toggle back and forth between the Spanish and English slides as well. And I'll keep speaking in English. Is what this table really shows is that as an organization, we will continue to we run programs and we do initiatives. We will continue to do work in practice, but in every practice that we have, what we're trying to do is then have a map, have like a roadmap of saying, how do we move that practice through policy advocacy to something that is permanent, right? So how do we move from practice to permanency? So in everything that we do, we want to make sure that we have that vision of what does permanency for this work look like, so that we are part of a system we are building, that this work just becomes the norm of the way that things are done and operated in Colorado and the United States and beyond. So lots of purposes, if that's the right word. We have many purposes for this law and policy roadmap that primarily Becca, who was also overseen, by a lawyer that we worked with on this project as well. So sort of the legal analyst team came together, which was Becca and another lawyer that we contracted with, as well as an equity analyst. So we had sort of a team of 3 contractors that really worked with us to write and to build this roadmap. Our equity analysts, for those of you who've joined previous webinars, Kiana Mickey could not join us for this webinar or next week because she just got this amazing new job running like this new Office of Urban Agriculture for the city of New York. So yay for Kiana, but for those of you who've seen her before, Kiana cannot join us today or next week. But Kiana and the legal team have been the team working with us to develop this roadmap from the beginning. And sort of why we got here is, one is to move forward that theory of change that I just shared with you. We also want to continue our work on identifying more policy questions for us as an organization. Where should we be looking? Where should we be pushing? Where should we be advocating? We have come to understand that we need sort of the legal guidance around gaps and opportunities in current policy work. So from our perspective as an organization that does advocacy work, we're always looking at, we have lots of lofty goals, right? We have a lot of things that we want to change, but sometimes we don't know exactly like where that change needs to happen or where to make change, right? Is there a law or a regulation that sits at the state level or the federal level? And where do we really need to focus our change making? We also wanted to identify, key areas of equity in this process, which I'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute here about policy can do great good and it can do great harm. So we wanted to go into this looking at how do we do good with policy and build back from some harm that policy has done and currently does. We did want to look at both federal and state policy issues through this work. Concurrently as well, right now we are going through organizational-wide policy-oriented strategic planning. So the roadmap and all these conversations are directly informing our strategic plan right here, right now. And we also just wanted to bring this roadmap to our partners, to other coalitions that we're a part of, to a lot of these issues that we are surfaced in this roadmap aren't necessarily issues that we would lead or lead alone by any stretch of the imagination. So we're hoping this would be an exercise that, you know, brought some value to our partners and advanced partners policy work as well. And thank you. So one other thing I should mention as well as I kind of toggle between slides here is that Jesse has chatted in the link to these slides, which we will share afterwards as well, but you can follow on along on your own as well. So just one last thing about the roadmap as well. There were 7 legal objectives that we, Becca, really did a deep dive into through the roadmap. One was about implementing SNAP EBT integration, so possibilities for placing the SNAP incentive, in our case that's Double Up Food Bucks, directly onto a SNAP EBT card rather than like a separate voucher coupon. Today, what we're looking at is item number 2, providing local food vendors with funding and technical assistance to access modern, affordable technology. We'll be talking a lot about, say, SNAP EBT acceptance at direct markets. Number 3, and these are not in any sort of priority order, by the way, include values-based procurement requirements for public dollars spent on food. So we're looking at how public institutions, the amount of money they spend on food, and opportunities for increasing more sort of values guidance into public procurement, like buying local, buying from certain growers, buying, and you know, how we can actually have more values around the environment, around economies, around equity, into how how institutions are purchasing food. Next week, we'll be diving into number 4, which is integrate food into the school system and exploring how we have segregated school food very much from the rest of school and opportunities for maybe integrating school food back more into the school system. Another one is around creating a Colorado Farmer Equity Office in the state of Colorado. Another one is around increasing federal grants to states like Colorado for nutritious food and fresh produce, given a lot of the work that we do is dependent upon federal dollars. So what are opportunities to sort of increase allocations, equitable allocations of those federal dollars to states? And then lastly, we explored an issue around increasing access to and participation in the child and adult care food program by expanding which care providers are eligible to be reimbursed by the child and adult care food program. That was a lot, all 7 of those. In the invite, we did link to this entire roadmap, and I think it's about 130 pages long. Thank you, Becca, very much. But if you didn't receive that, please feel free to chat or email one of us and we can give you the whole entire roadmap that goes into all of these 7. But today, just a little bit more about why we are here today and some caveats is that amazing 130-page document it really is a legal analysis. And as instrumental as that is to sort of fueling our policy work and equipping us with really great direction and tools, we understand that the legal analysis and the legal landscape is just a part of our work here today. And that there is so much around the current context, around the cultural context, the political context, the social context. There's so much more wrapping around these issues that we need to understand. And this is just the beginning of our work. So, and to being here today with you is just one other step in us doing our work as well. As I mentioned, we've been working with Kiana from the very beginning to every time we were exploring issues, putting them on the roadmap, having those discussions around, okay, what is sort of the history of this issue? What is the current status of this issue? What can potentially be the future? What are opportunities to increase collaboration for these issues? And what are some equity issues that we really need to keep front and center? And one thing that Kiana does a beautiful job of articulating at this point is that we, from the very beginning, have been hoping to be very honest with ourselves and others and acknowledging that we are talking about policy change. We're talking about doing legal work and policy change. And yet we are living in a system that has hundreds of years of history and very, very current application of laws, regulations, systems, and policies that are built on disenfranchisement, that are built on slavery and genocide and oppression. And we are in the midst of, have inherited or in the midst of a system, a policy system that has been used historically and still to this day to do harm. And yet we're here saying, we want to do policy that does good, right? We want to do policy that advances equity. And how do we do that in a way that acknowledges sort of where we come and where we've been from? And then how do we move forward in ways that bring in more of our partners and are very, very transparent about who is going to benefit and who may not from the work that we are proposing to do. So a little bit more around what this process that we're going through is. Part of this obviously is we're building this roadmap. We have 130 pages plus many more tools that Kiana has been developing with us behind the scenes, but we're building out a roadmap. So how do we do this? Like, what is our path forward to impact? We have tried to be very intentional from the beginning that the roadmap is connected to our theory of change. That is what we are moving forward. We want to consistently assess, like, what is the best use of our capacities and our resources as an organization, and also where are our assets, you know, where are they done, where we maybe are others in a better position to move forward with this work. Obviously, hopefully this helps us be really strategic in our organization's work planning, and then be transparent in partner engagement so that we're transparent about what we are doing and why. And again, are offering this up to other partners that may be in a better position than we are to move some of this work forward. So it's a long-winded way of saying there are many, many steps to this process, and there's a lot more to come. And we will continue to be in touch with you about how we move this work forward. And with that, I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to move into sort of the content part of this webinar. And I'm going to pass it off to Rosalind, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the issues that Becca unveiled in the roadmap. So sorry, Rosalind, I can't see you, so it's super awkward when I'm talking, but please take it away.
All right. Hi, everyone. And I'm going to put my contact info and just a little bit more background on CFMA into the chat as well. We're a membership organization and 30 plus year old membership organization representing markets around Colorado. And we provide this support and advocacy and technical assistance to markets, including supporting for EBT equipment. And it's so important that Nourish and this larger team is working on addressing these issues. There's a lot of great partnership working on it. There's also a lot of challenges that markets face with access to consistent equipment. So to accept SNAP at farmers markets, the market has to both be signed up with the USDA for a food and nutrition services number and have EBT equipment, which means either a separate machine or an app that can be used on any kind of device, an iPad or a phone. And it's really important for most markets and farms, unless there's a farmer's market that's indoors, that equipment be wireless. And for a number of years, the Colorado Department of Human Services has had funding to provide wired equipment, but has only had limited funds for wireless, with the exception of some grants that Sarah will give the background on later. There is a shift where the new contract that the Department of Human Services is implementing will provide funding for wireless equipment. So by July of 2023, there will be a lot more, it'll be a lot easier for markets in Colorado to access funding and to have consistent support and equipment. And that's in large part due to the work that Sarah has done and her work being really connected with all of these partners and with markets. So it's really a game changer sitting from my perspective and hearing from markets about needing to move from one grant to another or one provider to another and figuring it out. And for the state to be able to provide that funding and consistency will really, really make a difference in Colorado. Next slide, please.
Oh, just one more. On
Oh,
this.
and I'm sorry, that's great. Becca, we're sharing slides.
Yeah.
So I have to
I know.
pause.
Yes, so a second avenue for enhanced technology access for both vendors and consumers using SNAP especially is the SNAP Online program. This is currently a very rapidly expanding pilot program from the USDA that allows SNAP participants to be able to purchase groceries online with participating retailers. So participants will be able to use their SNAP benefits in this program to purchase SNAP eligible food products from participating retailers, but this doesn't include payment for the service or delivery charges. The pilot was authorized in the 2014 Farm Bill, and then in 2017, it was announced that 8 retailers and 8 pilot states would be involved in the initial launch of the program. And then in 2019 is when it actually began, and it started only in New York State. And by 2020 was expanded to all 8 pilot states. But of course, after that, something super interesting happened and it expanded a lot faster, which I'll get to in a couple of slides from now.
All right. So in Colorado, we have a lot of assets that are already in place that make SNAP at farmers markets really viable. There's over 100 markets or direct marketing farms that are authorized to accept SNAP currently. And there's many markets around the state that are authorized, certainly not all of them. It's something we're always encouraging, and that many farmers are often encouraging market managers to sign up. I know in the Denver area, there's about we're getting to a little more than half of the markets in the Denver area are authorized to accept SNAP. And statewide, I think we're probably at more than half, but certainly not all markets. But there's a lot of long time participation with welcoming SNAP at farmers markets around the state. The strong partnership with the Colorado Department of Human Services and Sarah in particular, it makes a huge difference when there's issues that come up. You know, Sarah will write to me and colleagues at Nourish and say, we have this change coming up with these updates. Can we get the information out to markets? Have you heard from this market? Do you have their updated email? And so, you know, that's just one example of open and constant communication that really makes it much easier for us to provide support to markets. That any of you who are market managers who are on the call, just having that coordination makes it much easier to get the word out and provide the support that's needed. So can't emphasize enough how important that is, and that it's not necessarily a given. So it's not something that I want to take for granted ever. And then we also have support from the USDA and FNS is Food and Nutrition Services, Mountain and Plains Regional Office. So next slide, please. All right, and it's a USDA priority to increase SNAP participation of direct marketing farmers and farmers markets. I'll get into this a little bit more. I'm going to talk a bit more later about barriers to this. So some of the things that it would be great to see an easier process for markets and farmers to sign up and to stay signed up. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. There's this requirement that states provide funding for SNAP equipment, but the requirement has not been for that equipment to be wireless. And again, the new contract with CDHS will really change that in Colorado, starting in the middle of next year. So we've got one more market season to get through without that support, but since markets will really need to be signed up and have equipment going before the season begins, but going forward, it'll be a lot. And Becca, I'll turn it over to you for the SNAP Online.
Yeah, so SNAP Online would obviously be very helpful and an equitable option to increase online grocery access, as delivery of groceries has just grown so much in the past 2 years after the pandemic. And due to other reasons as well, it's just now technologically feasible for families to be buying groceries this way. And it really should be something that's available to all consumers, including those that use SNAP. So by allowing SNAP to be used online, it will really create a more equitable system of purchasing groceries and just provide easier access to purchasing fresh fruits and vegetables, using your SNAP benefit by being a more inclusive option available to all consumers.
Okay, so we just wanted to next talk a little bit about some of the options that have been available in the past and one that is currently still available through the USDA FNS, so our federal partners. So I'm going to first talk about the state EBT equipment program. So back in June of 2019, the USDA FNS notified Colorado, as well as other states, of an opportunity to engage directly with farmers markets and direct market farmers by providing and supporting with wireless equipment through some federal funding. And that was through the Federal Nutrition Program Participation Assistance for Farmers and Farmers Market Grant Program. Quite the name there, super long, so quite a mouthful. The funding was available through September of 2021. So as soon as Colorado was notified, we submitted a letter of interest to our FNS federal partners that said we were interested. At that time, I had about 10 farmers or markets that were interested in no-cost wireless EBT equipment, but the state didn't have funding for. And then I also partnered with Rosalind at CFMA, Colorado Farmers Market Association, and then also Nourish Colorado to ensure that we requested adequate funding. At that time, it was estimated that there was approximately maybe 40 farmers markets, farmers that were in need of equipment. So Colorado submitted our request for interest, asking for funding for 50 wireless machines. We were approved for the grant funding, and so that was in September of 2019. And then April 2020 through September of 2021, Colorado did support a total of 26 markets. We were able to offer wireless as well as a bring your own device mobile app option, which was really exciting because that was the first time Colorado was able to offer another option. So up to that point in time, it was either wired, where you needed like an internet or Ethernet connection, or the wireless. And like we talked about earlier, I totally understand for our markets and farmers, wireless is the option. They are not brick and mortar. They do not have access to a wired device. And so funding did end in September of 2021. And at that time, I was able to transition 6 of the markets, 3 with wireless and 3 with mobile app, to permanent funding through the state of Colorado. So I'm going to pass it off to Rosalind to talk about the other 2 options.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And yeah, some of that permanent funding for markets hasn't been able to help every market, but there's been about a dozen markets at least that have been able to be supported for a number of years with that funding and being able to transition some markets. And this is just to flag the challenges. That grant program was so helpful. It was really helpful for markets. And just to flag, one of the challenges with grant programs is that it ended September 30th, which had to do with the timing of the grant program. And it was a great option for markets to sign up for, but lots of markets go past September 30th. And it was a real challenge for those markets to figure out, okay, now what do I do? The grant funding has ended, and Sarah wasn't able to transition everyone to this permanent funding. And so it just extended, and I think Sarah was working to try to get it extended. You know, if it had been extended even through November, it would have been much easier for markets. So, so another program that existed up to a couple years ago was a program through the Farmers Market Coalition that was a 3-year free SNAP EBT equipment program. And when I co-managed Four Seasons Farmers Market in Wheat Ridge, we signed up to accept SNAP at the market in 2017. And we signed up through the Farmers Market Coalition for this grant program. It was the easiest grant application I've ever filled out. And it provided an iPad, a card reader, a printer, and it worked. It was so helpful. It was pretty smooth overall. And for those 3 years, it was just so helpful for the market not to have to think about where's the equipment coming from, where's the funding coming from, or would we be able to cover monthly fees? And then it did end exactly 3 years from that date, and then the market needed to figure out something else. But it was a really important and effective grant program. That grant program has transitioned into a program called with MarketLink, which provides farms and markets access to a mobile app for 1 year free of cost. And the costs for EBT equipment include the cost of the device. With that MarketLink program, the current one, the printing a receipt, that requirement is exempted. So, but it provides, with this current grant, it provides the app and the card reader to use on your own smart device. So, and one thing that MarketLink found with that grant program that they decided to put more energy into providing technical support for markets rather than having the funding extend beyond 1 year. And so they do provide support for markets and direct marketing farmers to sign up to accept SNAP at the market, which can be really, really helpful. So that's a program that is available for markets and farmers to sign up for anytime before the end of September of 2023. And at the time that you sign up, you receive the app and the card reader, and then the equipment cost, which is a monthly fee, is covered for 12 months. So if you sign up right now, it'll go through the middle of September of 2023. If you signed up next August, you would still have it for 12 months through the following year. So, but you cannot have participated in that grant program at any time in this particular grant program at any time previously. So it provides a 1 year option for markets. Markets that have never been part of the MarketLink grant program, it would be a great option to sign up for in the winter this year to cover your next season for the coming year. And then you could sign up for the state program that will have funding for wireless equipment for all of 2024. So if you've already been part of the MarketLink program, there will be a gap to fill in before the state funding kicks in. All right, I think now I turn it over to Becca again.
Thanks. Yeah, so as I mentioned, Snap Online began as and still is a pilot program in those originally 8 states. But in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and social distancing requirements, the USDA FNS issued a federal waiver to allow for emergency expansion of the pilot program. And this allowed the program to grow to 39 states by June of 2020, which was really quick for a pilot, but it was needed. And now all states except for Alaska participate. Colorado began its participation in May of 2020. It currently has authorized these 7 retailers here on the screen. Some of them are smaller-ish, not smaller, but general grocery stores like Safeway, where some of them are, the big onlines, Amazon and Walmart. But we're getting a more even distribution here in Colorado. And just throughout this summer, 44 more retailers have been added nationwide to the program. So it still is continually expanding across different retailers in states and becoming a broader way to access your groceries. You can go to the next slide. So to participate in SNAP Online, retailers have to meet 3 general requirements. And this is where it gets a little tricky for some of the smaller retailers and farms to participate. The first is that you must abide by FNS retailer stocking requirements and be authorized as a SNAP retailer. And this means that you have to provide either one of 2 staple food requirements, either meeting the staple food inventory requirement or the staple food sales requirement. And those are just 2 different ways of assessing whether you have staple foods available for consumers. Staple foods are the basic foods that make up a significant portion of a person's diet. They're usually prepared at home and eaten as a meal. They do not include prepared foods, heated foods, or accessory foods. And staple food categories include vegetables or fruits, dairy products, meat, poultry, or fish, and breads or cereals. Essentially ensuring that the food you're providing is healthy food. Then the second requirement, which is really where it gets the most tricky, is meeting the online purchasing requirements. So SNAP must be, sorry, I just saw Target. Oh, cool, sorry. The online purchasing requirements include you have to be a SNAP eligible retailer, have to have an online e-commerce presence, and have a website capable of being updated to meet the detailed requirements of operating an online purchasing operation. And that is generally what is the most challenging for smaller stores, as they're not used to having this equipment available or software available, or it's very expensive to acquire such online programs and presence. And then the third requirement is to submit a letter of intent to the SNAP online purchasing mailbox, essentially to apply. And as I mentioned, although any retailer can apply for SNAP Online, many farms and markets do not have this level of online presence and therefore cannot participate, which could lead to some issues just in providing greater access to fresh and nutritious foods. We want everyone to be able to access food, especially with more people needing online purchasing of their groceries. And there is thoughts that perhaps interested smaller farms and markets could potentially join a collective or some sort of like food hub or something to be able to access this program together and have a website that puts all the foods that are available from those places so that people can be using their SNAP benefits to purchase online from smaller places as well. So one change in the regulatory environment note I would like to make here relates to what Sarah and Rosalind has described before in the equipment available through federal assistance. In 2012, the FNS equipment grants for farmers markets was in place that allowed Congress allowed the USDA to provide EBT equipment to eligible farms and markets, and FNS provided funding to states, and then when states weren't using it, provided it directly to markets and farmers as a grant to provide wireless EBT equipment. And this only covered the startup cost, not long-term costs or service provider fees, but it was still available. Then in 2014, the Farm Bill changed this law and required that retailers bear the cost of EBT machines. So retailer food stores could no longer be supported in this way and had to bear their own cost of mobile technologies, including POS machines. And this change made retailers no longer eligible to get free equipment, but there was some exemptions made, and eligible farmers markets and direct marketing farmers were included in those exemptions, which allows them and requires them actually to be provided with free EBT only POS machines. And this was addressed earlier in the requirement that farmers markets be provided with POS machines, but they're not required to be wireless, which is an issue. So then that creates kind of a cycle of why we need wireless programs in place on top of this new exemption from 2014. And then barriers and inequities, I think passing it back to Rosalind.
Did you see, there's a quick question I'm just gonna interject. Sorry in there, Becca, do we know what the rationale was for changing this?
I am not sure, honestly. I think it was just that they wanted to do that, but I can check and I'll make a note to check that. Thank you, Rebecca, for the question.
All right, so I'm going to talk a bit about the barriers and inequities as far as accessing EBT technology as well as signups for FNS. And this is coming from a number of years of working with market managers and seeing in Nourish and Sarah as well, seeing the challenges that markets face. The first thing is signing up for an FNS number, which can be some very straightforward paperwork. It also, there's things that can be much more challenging if you have one thing missing in your application and you don't go and finish it, then your application is deleted after 2 weeks. I've seen that it works fairly smoothly for some markets signing up, and some it's challenging enough that they give up. And it takes a while. It takes a while, and so markets that are looking in the summertime, we have a lot of demand. Could we get this up and running? And if it took a month, it would be quick. And I think it's a challenge all around with just more markets signing up, staffing, going through that process. But if we could get systems in place that made it smooth and efficient for markets to sign up for the FNS authorization, we would be way ahead, and there would be quite a few more markets who, for example, would have had SNAP up and running for this season, even if we're just looking this year. There's a gap between farms and markets compared to grocery stores, and it's starting to do with finances. Also, the fact that markets they're not year round. Sarah made a point about this, that it's seasonal, and so market managers are starting everything up unless there's a winter market or a year-round market, starting everything up every season. And there's also quite a bit of turnover for market managers. Sometimes folks are salaried if they're paid through a city. Often it's a part-time position. Some markets are run by volunteer boards. This is something across the board, that a recognition of the work that market managers do, and having it be able to be much more of a longer term and viable position would make a difference, even with these kinds of, with so many things, but also with EBT equipment and continuity of SNAP at markets. And when there's challenges with equipment, markets are generally held on weekends or in the evening, and it's important that there be technical support available at those times. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't. And that's something I've heard from market managers that would be really helpful to be able to have that support, and to be able to test devices early in the season would also, before the season starts, before be able to have the ability to actually test the device with a test card in the winter time, and instead of waiting to see, not being able to test it and having to wait to see if it works when your first customer comes to use their SNAP card. And then, and so that testing the technology for the season. And then the training piece, this is something CFMA and a number of partners has, over time, we've done trainings on signing up for SNAP. Wendy was really instrumental in organizing trainings for markets years ago now that really got a lot of markets on board. I mean, doing something like that again would be really helpful. We had staff from the USDA. We were able to go directly and sign up. I think a lot of markets signed up at that time because it was really accessible, and it was really possible. And so over time, there's been those sign-up trainings. As I've been talking with markets, particularly this year, it's become really clear that one of the issues for markets with both keeping their FNS number and EBT equipment has to do with needing to do check-ins on this every year. And particularly with the FNS number, there's one individual who signs up with their social security number, and FNS won't talk to anybody else unless that person is in the room and authorizes another person to talk to them. So if you have a transition in market management, it's difficult to find that contact person if the address hasn't been updated the way that FNS typically is communicating with markets by mail. And so, for example, every 5 years, I just learned this year when a market was facing this, FNS sends a letter to the mailing address of the market and says, are you going to be continuing to use your EBT equipment? And there's a market that moved and they didn't get the letter. And so their FNS number was cut off and they had to start all over again. And so what we're seeing the need for is not just conducting trainings for markets to sign up for SNAP, but every single year, every January, bringing our market managers together and going through best practices and creating a manual essentially where every year you want to make sure that your contact information is up to date, that your address is up to date, that the good idea to check in with everything, make sure your equipment is fine. And so those pieces, so I think that training, which there's been a lot of, has been and will continue to be a lot of input from market managers, will be really helpful because there's quite a bit of turnover. And just to know that even if you've had an EBT machine that's been working for a number of years, you want to have checked in on it every year to make sure that it'll continue to work. Sarah Mitchell created a handbook, basically a 2 or 3 page handbook on manual vouchers for farmers markets, which is really important as a backup for when the EBT equipment isn't working. You can use the manual vouchers, but you still have to be able to call in. You have to have cell signal in order for the manual voucher to work and call in at that time. But that kind of comprehensive manual has been really helpful to markets, and making sure that every market has manual voucher forms on hand, knows what to do, is really important. I would add to that barrier piece where if your EBT equipment isn't working, that you have to call in to get an authorization code on site, means that in a rural area, if the EBT equipment isn't working and if your cell phone signal is out, you're completely, even the backup of manual vouchers doesn't work, which can be challenging. So I think so I'm speaking to, there's lots of things that are working, but there's also a lot of things that I think all of us can do and that could shift everywhere from on the market level to the policy level to make things go more smoothly for markets and for folks who are shopping with SNAP at farmers markets. And Becca, do you want to speak to the last point on EBT incentive integration?
Sure. Right. Yeah. So the EBT incentive integration was addressed in our first webinar, and Colorado and other states are in the process of trying to get this in place so that essentially your incentives for double up will be going right onto your EBT card rather than having manual vouchers. And writing on your card means the equipment that's accepting this card also needs to be able to accept the incentive. So not all POS equipment that accepts general SNAP benefits are ready to be able to accept incentives as well, and how to put that on the receipts and inform both the cashier and the customer of how many benefits you have left to redeem, and all that will have to be updated. So it's important that all equipment is ready to accept not only SNAP, but also incentives on the EBT cards. And we can also move to the next slide to discuss some of the barriers that are in place for the SNAP Online program. This essentially goes back to what I was saying earlier, in that online grocery shopping is just becoming increasingly helpful and important for families, whether it's due to convenience or health and safety or disability. The COVID-19 pandemic really just spotlighted this issue, but with the technology we have today, it is important that we make this available to all consumers. And it's just a barrier that consumers don't have access right now to some of the more smaller retailers or fresher stores with more local produce and things like that with online transactions. And it's a balancing act because it's also a barrier for those smaller retailers to be involved with SNAP Online because of the requirements for websites and things like that. But we just need to figure out how to be able to get consumers access to this program in all sorts of produce vendors, and then get vendors access to the program as well. So we're making steps toward this. And another aspect of a barrier that lies mostly for the vendors is technical assistance, and figuring out how to manage these websites once they're in place is really important. But one solid piece of information on this matter is that the ARPA funds, or the COVID relief money in place from last year's legislation, does include a $5 million grant called the SNAP EBT Modernization Technical Assistance Center grant. And this provides money to retailers offering online shopping for technical assistance needs, which is really important, as we discussed with the farmers market technical assistance needs as well. Okay, best practices. So luckily this slide has been updated since I created the roadmap in the spring. When I wrote the roadmap, the states listed here, California, New Mexico, and Wyoming, were 3 of the 18 states that included a provision in their EBT state processing contract with the EBT provider or EBT equipment provider that requires the contractor to provide a no-cost wireless SNAP-only POS equipment and services to authorized farms and markets. And as was mentioned, happily, Colorado will be joining these states next market season, with CDHS adding a similar provision to their 2023 FIS contractor who provides EBT equipment. And this should be in place by the end of June next year. So we can be added to the best practices list. And for expanding SNAP and SNAP support, there was a federal bill introduced that didn't go through, Expanding SNAP Options Act, that would further online accessibility, create an online portal for SNAP benefit redemption, and broaden acceptance of SNAP benefits through online transactions, really just create a hub of information and resources so that both consumers and vendors have somewhere to go with questions and help and support, so that it runs more smoothly and can be available more widely. And then as for recommendations, we have here, and as Wendy mentioned in the beginning, these are purely legal recommendations, and there's so much more work to be done in talking to others and getting advice from various realms of this world we live in to make sure these recommendations are actually what we want and will work for everyone. But the first is that we assist and encourage vendors to get updated EBT integrated POS machines that are appropriate for accepting SNAP benefits and incentives. Implementing the law that just passed in Colorado this past session, HB 22-1380, the Critical Services for Low-Income Households law, supports this endeavor greatly by providing technology support for smaller vendors, especially through grants. And the second is that we require Colorado to consistently provide farms and markets with wireless EBT machines at no cost to the vendors. And as you mentioned, this recommendation has been met and will be implemented this upcoming summer. But another avenue, instead of doing this state by state, where each state has to write their own contract and has to have the initiative to create a wireless provision, it could be changed federally as well in the Farm Bill so that it's required that all states have to include a wireless provision in providing free wireless equipment to farms and markets that need it. And then the third recommendation is to advocate for practices that support the expansion of SNAP Online for easier access to and better understanding of and support in the SNAP Online program that is currently functioning as a pilot and growing every day. And that is all for the content of the presentation. Thank you for listening, and we can move on to the small group discussions. But do we have any questions or clarifications or anything like that from the presentation so far?
Thank you, Becca, Rosalind, Sarah, thank you all. And please, if you have any questions, feel free to just jump in or chat in, whatever works. And I will slowly move us forward to small groups. Break it so we can all just talk about this a little bit more together. So we have a lot of potential questions here, and we're going to split, I think, into 2 groups. Jesse's going to beam us all into 2 groups. And we just want to kind of talk through, we want to get your reflections on all of this. So don't go away yet. I know some people have been chatting and they have to drop after an hour, totally understandable. With those of you who are still able to be here with us, we just want to go into small groups and talk about, first of all, get kind of your thoughts about, this initial recommendation. EBT pilot, is this a priority? Why or why not? Are there other efforts that are already happening around? Oops, I'm laughing because these questions say EBT integration. So the point is, these first questions are really all getting at, this is from the last webinar, these questions are really all getting at, just, is this a priority? Who else is working in this field? Who else should we be talking to, and all that? And then we'll do some of those questions, and then we might break. And then we're actually, you know what, Jesse, usually what we do here, I'm going to make a command decision and just stay in small groups. Usually what we do is we go for about 10 minutes and then come back and just do a quick little kind of report out together. And then we go back into small groups and talk about sort of action items and next steps. But why don't we just stay? Give us a good 20 minutes in our small groups. So Jesse, you're playing Scotty Montgomery, or Montgomery Scott, whatever his name is. God, I should get this right. You're playing Scotty on the Star Trek for us today. You're going to beam us in and out. So why don't you just beam us to small groups, and we'll stay there for about 20 minutes. And we'll kind of go through all rounds of questioning, and then you can bring us back. So hopefully that works. So stay with us. Jesse's going to split us into 2 groups, and we'll just do a little reflection around this as a priority. Who else is working in the space? And then what are some next steps we can work on together? Sticking with us and being here, Andrea, and everyone else. That's so great. Well, we just ended our small group with this amazing mic drop of Caitlin's it was time to decolonize these areas. Who knew we would go all these amazing places? Yeah, that's what you missed, Laura, at the end there, was it's time to anyway, a few things that came up in our group about just how when we're talking about technology that's very dependent on certain cell, in this instance, AT&T cell towers, that there's really going to be some gaps in service moving forward when we try to bring technology across the state of Colorado. So lots more work for us to do as advocates and as policy partners. So thank you all for sticking with us here today. So just a couple quick things, just to close us out, let you all go. Hopefully you already had some lunch or whatever you can do next. But just a couple of quick things about next steps. We're recording these, we will share these out. You can then share these broader, you can share at will. This one particularly has we at Nourish are currently working on our Farm Bill advocacy platform as well. And these are certainly issues we're exploring through with national partners around Farm Bill work we can do, as well as how to increase access to appropriate technology for food vendors that are providing really critical food access in their communities. So thank you. Just wanted to let you know this stuff is being used real live time to inform our work. And then we have one more of these roadmap discussions around integrating school food into the school system. So next Tuesday from same time, 12 to 1:30. And just so it's clear what that means. So integrating school into the school food system is really looking at how we have segregated school food from the school food system in terms of like time, funding, staffing, curriculum. School lunch, for example, is treated as very, very different and separate from, say, a class, right, in the school day. So we want to kind of examine how to move towards a little more integration and get lunch sort of on the same playing field as, say, math or something else that you would not deny a child, although we tend to deny some children food at school or make it very hard to access. So that's what next week's, the last one in our roadmap series is all about. Thank you all for being here. We will follow up the recordings. Join us next week if you can, and more to come. And thank you all. Have a great Wednesday afternoon.